Hello, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to the Berlin Board of Education meeting for September 28th. We took a field trip. We're on location at the McGee Media Center today. We're going to start our meeting. I apologize for the slight delay we had. Rise and say the pledge. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. Couple of brief announcements before we get started with the meeting tonight. First, I'm sure that the audience and I'm sure the board members also know that the governor has moved us into phase 3 of the reopening of Connecticut after October 6th, I believe is the date. 8th. The 8th, is it? The 8th, I'm sorry. Either way, actually recover because our next meeting is the 13th. So we're going to be investigating whatever the new parameters are and the new protocol for meeting in terms of how many people can attend the meetings and any other protocol changes that might take place. And our meeting on the 13th will adjust to that and reflect the new norms, if you will. Second of all, we are one member short. Shortly after the last meeting, I just wanted to announce that Matt Tenza submitted his resignation effective immediately from the Board of Education. Matt served the board as president for 3 years and on the board for 6.5 years and was incredibly dedicated with his time and energy and intellect. And I want to thank him, and I know we've all privately thanked him for his time, but I want to make it a public thank you as well. It's a lot of effort, 6.5 years, especially as he was chair of the Finance and Operations Committee and all the work that's being done on the budget. The new chair is going to be Tim Oakes. It actually already is. I believe the website already reflects that change, so if anybody has any information for Tim or for the Finance and Operations meeting, Tim Oakes will be the person who also is running late tonight, but he'll be here, and he's the new committee chairperson. And third, I would like to present a motion to amend the agenda for tonight's meeting, please, as having a discussion on the football situation. We all received an email today that will probably kick off that discussion, but essentially, while we've avoided adding things to the agenda in the past, and while I wouldn't categorize this as an emergency, it is absolutely time sensitive. Really can't wait 2 more weeks to have the conversation. So I would like to put up a motion, as I said, to add a discussion on football as part of, let's see, where would it go? Probably right in front of new business, I would imagine. Or where would be the most appropriate place to put it, assuming we put it in?
Right after new business.
Right after the new business, right? Okay. So I would need a second on that, if everybody's interested.
I'll second that.
Okay. Seconded by Adam. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, so we're going to add that in after new business. And we'll have the discussion then. All right, new business. We've got some contracts. The first contract is between the Berlin administration and the Board of Education, and there is a motion in front of you.
I'll move to approve the agreement between the Berlin Board of Education and the Association of Berlin Administrators for the period of July 1, 2021 through June 30th, 2022.
Second.
Seconded by Julia. Any discussion on that? Any comments, questions? No?
Well, I think we
Oh,
just, maybe, Brian, do you want to just explain what that means? I mean, I think the extension is essentially keeping what we have in place for one additional year, correct?
Yes, it's keeping everything in place as the contract was for 1 additional year, which will allow us to see where things are to this given year, which we know is unprecedented times. So,
Given the economic instability at the time, we decided that was the best motion going forward. Any other comments or questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It passes? Carried.
I didn't hear it, so I can't, sorry.
We were discussing the administration extension of 1 year. We're just going through right now. We're going through the motions.
I do vote in favor of that. I
Okay.
was here.
Okay, thank you. Next, there's a second one. A contract extension agreement with food service supervisors. And there's a motion in front of you as well.
I'll move to approve a contract extension agreement between the Berlin Board of Education and the United Public Service Employees Union, Local 424, Unit 57, Food Service Supervisors for a period of July 1, 2020 through June 30th, 2021.
I'll second.
We have a second. Comments, questions? So is this I'll put it out, is this
Similar.
another 1 year extension as well? Is that the norm for this, or is this also given the climate that we're in right now?
This is the climate we're in,
All right.
and that we thought rather than going to negotiations and spending that time mapping out a 3-year contract, which is typical to all these union groups, that getting a 1-year extension with similar parameters to the previous years was a better route to go, given the uncertainty of moving forward. So you'll see that all 3 tonight are 1 years.
Excellent. Any other questions or comments from anybody? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It's unanimous. And we have another one in front of us right now with the food service employees.
I'll go 3 for
You gonna
3.
make it 3 for 3?
Yep.
All right.
I will move to approve a contract extension agreement between the Berlin Board of Education and the United Public Service Employees Union, Local 424, Unit 40, for food service employees for a period of July 1, 2020 through June 30th, 2021.
I'll second.
Okay, second. And comments, questions? All those in favor? Opposed? Passes unanimously. So those are the 3 contract extensions that are in front of us. Carrie, just so you know, right before you came in, I made a motion to add the football conversation as a discussion piece, and it was approved, so that's what we're going to work on right now.
And Rich, if
Yeah.
I just got a note from somebody saying they're having a hard time hearing on the YouTube channel. I'm not sure if we can turn anything up on our end, but
Is it our microphones, or is it
the masks,
Okay.
probably a
That
combination
could
of
be.
everything.
We're okay? All right. If
Thank
we
you.
need to move the mics closer, just let us know. We'll take care of it. Thank you. All right. So earlier today, and I think we'll use this to kick it off, so our agenda item right now is the discussion on Berlin football. Now, normally we don't add agenda items, like I said earlier in the meeting, unless it's an emergency of some sort, but this is very time sensitive. So we deemed that the discussion would be appropriate happening tonight. We got an email from a parent named Scott Melville that I'm going to read his letter into the record, and then we can have a conversation about it, and I'll turn it over to Brian at that point, and we can discuss. It's long, but I'll read the whole thing. It was sent to many town leaders as well of the Board of Ed. Dear Mayor Kaczynski, Superintendent Benigni, Principal Eustace, AD Francolangia, and esteemed members of the Berlin Board of Education. 1, 2, 3 family. This is the chant that you hear after every football practice and game played here in Berlin. It doesn't matter if it's flag football, youth football, or high school football. This message, while simplistic in its delivery, is beautiful in its execution. You see, here in Berlin, no matter what level of football is being played, the entire program works together as one common entity. They are truly invested in each other's success. Our coaches at the high school constantly make time to come down to help out our Berlin Bears. Our high school players coach our flag players. This culture in Berlin, here in Berlin, is something that we should all be proud of. Unfortunately, due to the pandemic and the unwillingness of some political leaders, one of our family members has been told they cannot play the game that they love, the game that most of them have been playing at Sage Park since they were 5 years old. My name is Scott Melville, and I represent the families of the BHS football players who were essentially told that all of the work they have put in over the past 10 years to make it to their varsity seasons does not matter. I am writing you today to request all of you partner with us in finding a solution to this problem. We need your help. While we certainly understand the gravity of the pandemic, we also see mental and physical toll that this is taking on our student athletes. The numbers and statistics are well documented, and it is not my intention to rehash those here, but the likelihood that one of the players will get sick from the flu is significantly higher than they will catch COVID-19. Furthermore, there is no evidence that an asymptomatic person can pass the disease along to someone else. So where does that leave us? We now have a group of kids throughout the state of Connecticut who, by all accounts, have done everything that they were asked to do. They have worn the masks, they have remained socially distant, they have followed every guideline outlined by the state and federal government, yet they still have been outcast and told that they cannot participate in the sport that they love. Even worse than that, virtually every other sport is being played. How must this make them feel? Every night I pick up my 8th grader from BHS from his football practice, and as you pull into the school, you can hardly find a parking spot. The basketball courts are full, every tennis court is in use, and thankfully our youth players have been allowed to continue their season. How can this possibly be fair? The NFL, MLB, NHL, and CFB have all found their way to play their respective games. Yet for some reason, high school football in Connecticut remains to be discriminated against. Just yesterday, Governor Lamont announced plans to move forward with Phase 3, citing the following. The reason why we're able to have a discussion about even entering into Phase 3 is because of Connecticut residents' collective actions to fight the spread of COVID-19. By taking the sector rules seriously, wearing masks, physically distancing, and washing your hands regularly, I believe we can continue to keep these rates low while also easing some of the restrictions that were enacted earlier this year. I applaud the residents of our state for what they've been doing and urge them to keep it up. That was from Governor Lamont. Now, this is back to Mr. Melville. Similarly, major college football conferences such as the Big Ten and Pac-12 have reversed their decision to sit the season out due to the pandemic, and they will now be playing in the fall. Even Meriden and Southington, two neighboring towns, are allowing their football players to participate in 11v11 football this fall. According to Max Preps, as of September 17th, at least 36 other states will be playing 11v11 football in the fall of 2020. We are hoping that all of you can follow suit and help us find a path where they will allow the kids to play 11v11 football this fall. Family members stick together, and when a family member is down, we rally around them to help pick them up. We hope you'll join us. We understand that what the easiest thing for all of you to do is simply to do nothing. As I have always taught my children, in life the right thing is rarely the easy thing. Aren't our kids worth it? I sure think they are. In the coming days, we'd like to have a meeting with all of you to discuss the following topics. We understand that we will not be sanctioned to play by the CIAC, therefore players will need to find alternative options, BHS Club or private independent leagues. So then he gave 7 different topics that he would like us to discuss. Topic number 1, possibility of football becoming a club sport. Topic 2, coaches. We would like to have our existing coaching staff be freed of any limitations that prevent them from being allowed to coach. Topic 3, equipment. We propose renting the gear from BHS for a nominal fee. We are willing to sign COVID waiver when we take possession of the equipment. Topic 4, uniforms. The uniforms that are currently being used was a private donation to the Berlin football program from the Budney family. Therefore, we believe the players should be able to use them. Topic 5, field availability. We'd like to have access to Sage Park's football field, typically on Friday nights. We'll follow any social distancing guidelines that the district deems appropriate. Topic 6, out-of-town travel. Since 7v7 has already been approved by the CIAC, we feel that no other discussion is required. Topic 7, full-time distance learning for the football players for the duration of the season. Please give me a call. We'd like to discuss. I'm not going to read his phone number out here, but he closes with, thank you for your consideration. We look forward to meeting with you. 123 family. Sincerely, Scott Melville. So we can either hear from our superintendent on his thoughts of the district thoughts on the matter, or if we have any thoughts before we do that. Anyone?
I just want to share that I'm happy that we received that email today. It gave, personally me a lot to think about. I think it was well written, and, it gives us something to really consider tonight and have a discussion around.
Now understand, I read his letter as written, so I can't vouch for the accuracy of some of the statements that are in there. I don't know whether some of these things are true, but I simply read what he sent to us.
Is spring football off the table as far from the CIAC? I haven't followed it closely as far as, is it completely done for the school year?
Spring
or is
football.
it just for fall, and that they reopened the discussion for spring? I don't know if anyone knows that answer.
They've not solely ruled spring football out at this time, to my knowledge. What they have ruled out is that 11v11 football as we know. The 11 against 11, typical football as we know it, has been ruled out by the fall. But CIC did announce in their last correspondence, which is a little over a week ago, they had a meeting over the weekend, and they got the governor requested the CIAC and the state health department get together to have further discussions. After the discussion, it was deemed that a state health department could not support. They still deemed it as a high-risk sport, At that point, the CIA statement came out saying they would allow coaches to coach clubs for this year, which goes against the typical CIAC guidelines. But the caveat that the CIAC put in the statement is that in order to form a club, you had to get approval from your local health department. So when that statement came out on Monday, I did make a call to Charles Brown at the Central Connecticut Health District and immediately asked him, would you support, club football? And he, 11-11, and he's not, he still believes it's high risk. He said he could not support that. So the whole notion of having a club sport, which typically a club sport is still under the school umbrella, that's how lacrosse started in town here initially. It was a club sport first, and received popularity, and then became a varsity sport. So doing a club sport at this time would be going against what the CIA said with getting approval from the local health department. So that seems like it would be difficult to do under the school umbrella. I don't know at this time, Rich, if you want me to go through and try to address the points that Scott made. Based on, I did have a conversation with Dave Francalangio, our athletic director, today. He actually called Glenn, who is the CIAC director, today to get some clarifications about that. So I think it's probably the best thing to do is go through, if I could just pull up the emails.
Why don't we
go
do
through
that?
the
We'll
points.
go
May I ask a question?
Okay, go ahead.
Before we get to,
Yep.
and forgive me for not knowing the answer to this, but as I understand it, soccer is allowed, correct? And
Yes.
so, I'm not a sports person, so forgive me. Why is soccer okay and football isn't? Because isn't it, it's the same kind of well, not as bad, I guess, the contact. Okay. Adam?
You want?
I don't mind, I'll take it.
Go ahead, Adam.
And I think that the concern with football is, especially with the offensive, defensive linemen, continually being at each other versus, a running back or quarterback that might not get touched as much. That's why the CIAC and health districts have said that you could have a 7-on-7 tournament, which is essentially passing and throwing, and just 7v7 without the linemen. Soccer, yes, there's certainly contact. My daughters are all playing right now, but it's not a consistent. It's not a consistent impact as football has, and that's been a distinction, mostly having to do with the offensive and defensive linemen that are continually, blocking each other.
It's the face-to-face part of the offensive and defensive line. I referee soccer. I've coached it my whole life. Adam's right. There's contact, but you're not really face-to-face on a regular basis with anybody. So I'm assuming that was the rationale behind it. Why don't we go through the 7, and then if anybody has any questions as we go through the 7, we can ask them individually. Do you want to go ahead, Brian?
Just one more question, Brian, before
Sure.
you start,
Sure.
since the first one is the BHS club. What's the difference between a BHS club or the club sport based on the independent, that the other?
Independent league?
Because now that my thing just closed, whatever the other option
So,
was.
so if we were a club sport, it still would be under school umbrella.
Yep.
It'd be Berlin High School club football,
Mhm.
which definitely looked at as an option. If we had the health department's
Exactly.
backing, we could fall into that criteria. It would meet the CIC
Exactly.
guidelines, and we can move forward.
Does the
The
second
con-
one work
But
like
the
that?
second one, if it was an independent league, it could not, based on CIC guidelines and the health department, we could not put it under this, well, I shouldn't say we couldn't. There's a liability issue with putting it under the school. We'd be going against the health department. And I have a letter that was written to the CIC director from Shipman and Goodwin, addressing the liability for the board and, myself as a superintendent in the town. With doing so, because it's going against what the recommendation was, it's really that health department's backing is the.
So they would technically have to get their own insurance policy.
They would
if
not
they-
be.
To go separate
It would be nothing, if it was Berlin's team, they'd have to get, the town would have to give them rights to the field.
Okay,
And as we go through the different areas that Scott brought up, which are great, he definitely addressed some of the areas. One is, where would they get equipment? So if we decided to loan the equipment to the students, our equipment and the uniforms, as he said, because they were donated, there's also concern that we still would be liable, we could be liable, even with getting them sign a release. That's where things are now, without having further communications with our attorney. Because one thought was that if there was, these independent leagues that are forming, this is a message from Dave, the AD, independent leagues that are forming with students from allegedly out-of-state students, students from various towns, not just, but we could, not we, because we wouldn't be behind it. Anyone could form an independent league and form a team and have Berlin players play on it. It just wouldn't be sanctioned by the school or the CIAC. And I don't know what the CIAC would do, I don't know the answer to this time, if our coaches coached in it, because they're high school coaches. I don't know if they would not let them coach them. I don't know what the ramifications would be, if there'd be any. I mean, it's the season's not running. And the question really also becomes, we talked about in the MOU, the season started, the coaches were coaching, they've been coaching, so we're paying them for it. But if we said, well, that pay now pays you to coach an independent league, we wouldn't have a say in an independent league, right? It's not sponsored by Berlin at this point, unless we decided that we would seek legal advice and go against the health department and the CIAC and say, we're going to do it. And that's really, I mean, and knowing Meriden quite well, because my brother, I do know where they are, and the town is allowing them to use the field. But I think Southington is much different.
It is, and I talked to our athletic director, and I don't want to speak for him,
Yeah.
but it's not quite accurate to say that Southington is allowing 11v11 football. Certainly the school system is not. They're in the middle of a proposal right now to see what would be a kind of where we are. There's a proposal that's being generated to figure out what's okay and what's not okay, but nothing definitive has been decided. We kind of skipped over the coaches one.
I was just Jamie.
okay.
So,
Yeah, I
I
just
mean,
wanted
and I
to
think,
know
I
if
think
Brendan-
all of us have our own personal beliefs, and I have mine regarding it. And as I said to the parents when we met with the Zoom meeting, I want to do anything I can to support the students, and so that they can play. But I also know that there's guidelines and parameters that are outside of my control, as a superintendent, with the health department and so on. So I think there's a striking balance that we have to have. But let me speak to these points.
Sure.
Here.
Thank
So
you.
the possibility of becoming a club, I think the biggest the biggest obstacles there is that the CIA said in order to be a club, we had to get local health department approval, and we don't have that at this time, after 2 conversations with our local health department director. Coaches, we would have our existing coaches, staff, be freed of any limitations that prevent. That is really not our decision. What the coaches do in the off-season, what they're allowed to do, those are parameters and stipulations put in by the CIAC. I know the CIAC has put out guidelines. If there was a club, they would waive those. And if they were coaching the students outside of a school team, I think there's room to do that and not be prevented from coaching. The equipment, initially my thought was on the equipment that's something that we could work within and let students use if they were playing even outside an independent league, but we'd have to have some type of waiver as addressed here. But I do have concerns that they're getting a letter from Shipman and Goodwin saying there still could be liability even with students and parents signing a waiver of responsibility if we let them use equipment that school purchased. So, I mean, there's some precautions that need to be taken based on legal advice. I have not talked to Shipman directly. It was a letter to the CIAC director from Shipman that was then disseminated to districts regarding equipment use. Uniforms, I understand the uniforms were donated, and thank you to the Budney family, as many families donate to the sports teams. I think it's the same part as the equipment. Obviously, it's a donation, but it is part of the Berlin football program. We have loaned the uniforms out for students going to the Capitol and things like that, so I don't see that as an issue. I don't see there's a liability issue from loaning uniforms out. Field availability, it's not our decision for the fields. It's really a town decision as far as the use of Sage goes and Sage Park on Friday nights. That would come from the town, not the schools. So we'd have to speak to the town manager regarding that.
So look, can I ask a question on that? Are there any fields that we control that we do not have to go through the town? Or are the fields controlled by the town across the board?
The fields are controlled by the town.
Okay.
So, and I know, in speaking to the town manager, I've received multiple emails from parents regarding the Berlin Bears program and why it's being allowed to run. And some towns, they've shut down the program. I think it's interesting. I believe the Meriden program shut down because they had a COVID case. But some towns have shut down their youth programs. Other towns have not. The health department is not, they've recommended not having the programs. That's Charles Brown, the same health director, but he's not at a point where he's mandating it. And so, hence the programs are running, because I've had phone calls and emails saying, well, if you're not allowing high school football, how can you allow, youth football? And it's really not that we're not allowing it. It's the CIAC saying we can't endorse it, we can't run it, and the health department, they are saying that they won't back it, and so that's really where it's getting stuck.
And we have no control over the youth programs in town.
Absolutely
We have
not.
no oversight.
The only control the town has, per se, is the field use. The town could prohibit field use, as it's done during the height of COVID with shutting down tennis courts and basketball courts and so on. Out-of-town travel, as I said before, 7v7, I know that's not popular. We definitely would support any leagues and programs that we can get backing from the health department. So, I agree with what's said here about if you're traveling for 7v7, the traveling for 11, is similar, except for, as Adam said, when you start talking about the linemen and the amount of physicality that happens at the line and the closeness of the line, it changes. So,
Do we know of, and not that this is contingent on it, but are there any schools that have said yes to 7v7? Are there any up and running 7v7 programs that we know of?
Not that I'm aware of, but I know that they're starting to talk about it. But they're also talking about whether some towns can get a club program going.
Okay.
And I think that a lot of conferences are looking at what can they do within their conference. There is concern that if there is an independent league where students are playing, student athletes, and they're also playing 7v7, the not conditioning and how, our athletic director said, how conditioned the students are and the overplaying and how much that would do, because now you have competing interest of the school and the independent league. There is some concern with that. But as far as the travel out of town, if you're traveling anyways, I don't see the issue.
So in the independent league that we were talking about, that Jamie mentioned earlier, the difference, that would be, is that comparable to AAU basketball or AAU baseball or premier soccer divisions? And normally the CIAC, the normal rules would be that you can't play that AAU basketball during the basketball season.
Right, and I just don't know if the CIAC, I don't know if conferences are going to say the 7v7 is a club program, and then the club program falls, and then the students, under the guidelines of the CIAC, can then play in an independent league also. Because when the statement came out from the CIAC a little over a week ago, there was drastic changes in what their previous guidelines were in involvement and so on. So I think I think there's a lot of room for interpretation there as far as whether you can do both. And I just to reiterate, it's not a question of the district not wanting to support the student athletes. I think that we will do whatever we can. I said from a financial standpoint to make this happen. I think it's a question of not having the backing of the health department, as everyone's aware, is a concern. And then there's a liability standpoint because we don't have the backing of the health department and the CIAC if we go down this road.
How about the last piece, which is the full-time distance learning for football players during the season?
I'd like to say, as a former athlete and with my own children, playing sports, I think it's difficult to sacrifice academics for athletics, but I also see that, I think to me, it's a measure of how bad these student athletes want to play, and they're willing to, have a different type of learning setting to allow them to play for a few months. And I think it's more of a sacrifice. I don't think any student, when you're learning online and you can learn at your own time and wake up when you want, it's one thing, but that's not the type of distance learning we're doing in Berlin right now. So you're still getting up, you're still attending your classes, you're still doing it, but you're looking at a screen, you're not socializing. So I view it as a sacrifice from the student to want to do something like that. And to me, it's just saying we're willing to do whatever we can to get back on the field for these few months. So, I can commend them in a way for being willing to do that, because I don't think any student wants to, sit in front of a screen for the day and not interact with their peers and their teacher in the school day.
Thank you. Questions, comments? I see Adam has his hand.
Just Brian, because I obviously with your Meriden connection, seeing as they said yes to playing, my initial understanding was Platt versus Maloney. Are you saying that they're going to be allowed to play teams outside of Meriden?
I don't think they know yet what they're going to do.
Okay.
Because I don't think they know if there's going to be any other
There's
teams
gonna be
to
any other
play.
teams.
That's the thing. But I know that speaking with my brother, he's very open to them playing, and committed to it.
But that's with the assumption that, and obviously the local health district for Meriden has already said yes to it.
Yeah, they have statements from the town manager for the field use as well as the health district. That's my understanding.
Because, I mean, I think that based on, and I did not receive Scott's letter, so I'm just hearing it from
Oh, I'm
first
sorry, I
hand,
can
so-
forward it to you. I didn't
No,
realize
it's
you
fine,
had.
it's fine. I just, Brian just forwarded it to me. Based on the letter, it sounds like we can get through the majority of the issues that have been brought up. But with I think the thing that's stopping us at this point is really the health district approval. Is that accurate?
In speaking to Dave, the AD, we both spoke, after 2 weekends ago, when the CIAC came out with their statement, and the big question was, what's the health department going to say? So if we had the health department's backing that they would allow it, I don't think we wouldn't have this, because we would have looked at, okay, we're going to go with, I know in speaking to, Dave speaking to Joe and Joe on the Zoom call, and that we would be going with a club and moving forward in that vein.
Right.
Because that was the linchpin with the CIAC to allow club participation, was the backing of the local health department.
And it was my understanding that 7-on-7 is something that was going to start as soon as next weekend. I could be wrong. And that they were going to try to do like the lineman challenges for like weightlifting and do other strength type of activities to make sure the linemen were included. I'm not saying that is ever going to replace playing the game, but I also do not believe that spring football is off the table. I think that's still something that could occur. And I know that I believe that most of the area states around us have already moved to a spring football season, but quite frankly, I mean, obviously, I'd be open to anything that can get these guys out on the field and playing. But if it's going to be contingent upon getting health district approval, then we're going to have an issue.
I think, and I don't want to, I'm not looking to debate the ideas of spring football.
Yep.
It could very well work well. Obviously, if we're talking facilities, in that case, as you share with other sports, and the balance of athletes in terms of who plays other sports, and can you do this without destroying multiple other sports due to the large number of participants in football? I think all that has to weigh in as well. But that's certainly a conversation. If the CIAC says yes to spring football, it's a conversation we're going to have. Any other questions, comments, anybody?
I just want to say that I totally understand the health district and, the battle that we would have to fight. I hope there's something that we can come up with or figure something out. I mean, I couldn't imagine how they feel right now, being that this is what they've spent their whole life doing. Some of them, this could be their last year. And it is unfair to them, and it has nothing to do with us, it has to do with the state, to see, well, hockey's playing, and baseball's playing, and soccer's playing, and basketball's playing, and whether they're clubs or whether it's scholastic, they get to play. And all of a sudden, these children or teenagers are like, but why not us? So it's very hurtful, and it with their mental well-being. I mean, they just need it for. Everybody needs an outlet. This is their thing, and especially if they were looking to go to colleges and to get recruited or for people to see them. I mean, it's definitely a devastating blow, and I just hope there's something we can do. And the whole spring thing, I know the CIAC originally had said no to football in the spring, and then they kind of were thinking about it, but it would be hard because of the fields, because a lot of football players play lacrosse. Mm-hmm. And then I know they had said, well, we could maybe do football February, March, and then you do April, May, another one, and it's just, who knows where we're going to be then? Like, we have no idea tomorrow. And I know that we have the health department, and we can't go against it. I just wish there was some way or something we could do to help them. I mean, I can't imagine.
So I'm not arguing the perceptions that they're very real. I get that completely. and I'm actually not arguing against what you're saying. I just want to be clear that the only sports that are even on the table for conversation are the fall sports. So I know you mentioned basketball. I know,
They're playing like
they're
club,
playing-
just like clubs, they were
Correct.
playing club, and then plus if you go to the high school, there's 40,000.
well, there's no club, it's private.
Right.
Those are private things, so it's different because it's off-season.
And I get that, it's not Scholastic that's doing that right now, but it's being done. And
Gotcha.
it's like, as a student, you're just seeing it being done, and it's definitely a blow, like, well, why not us? I mean, it's tough.
Do we have any current club sports right now? You said lacrosse started as a club sport. I know in Southington we have rugby.
Well, hockey's
Hockey.
varsity. It's just- it's a club.
So there's no club, at current level, there's no club
Usually how
sports.
they start off as a club.
Yeah.
I think Tracy, to your point there, when you think about the landscape of athletics and where it's gone over the last 10 years or so, the last sport that does not have the AAU or the Premier but a privatization is football.
Right.
And so it was still a purely a CIAC high school sport, whether it was prep school or, CIAC public high school sport. And so what we're seeing here potentially is the privatization of football with these independent leagues. As you've seen, Premier Soccer, AAU baseball, AAU basketball, and so on, which is a new place for football, which is disappointing given the fact that it's always been such a strong high school sport, and that's where it's resided. So,
I just have a couple
Jamie?
of thoughts while I'm going to think out loud. So the CIAC is in agreement that we can do 7 versus 7. So correct? Like they're saying that we're allowed to, our health district says that that's okay if we move forward that way.
our health district hasn't said, we've not proposed 7v7 with
Okay.
them. But the thought is that it's running in other states right now, like I know Vermont is running 7v7,
Okay.
but, so the thought is that 7v7, because as Adam said, doesn't have the linemen, would be approved,
Would-
and
better
we
off.
could get something going, and they could form leagues and so on.
Gotcha. So my thought is October is this weekend. So and I 100% feel like they should absolutely play. I can't even imagine, but that's my own personal opinion. But if I'm looking at logistics and something that is able to happen, and if 7v7 is a more realistic option and more school districts might get on board with that, as opposed to trying to do the 11v11, and let's say only Meriden is the school district, and let's say we chose to do that, but there's only the 2 teams, and nobody else in the state gets on board. So is it more realistic, if we're thinking about trying to get these kids out and able to play, to go and support the 7v7 with, like what Adam said, doing the line, I'm not familiar with football, but whatever you said about the linemen. Because October is coming up, I'm assuming they want to get out there soon. Do we, just from a do something point of, like what can we do to get them out there the safest way that we can and in the most realistic and logistical way that we can? That's just my thoughts out loud. Does that make sense?
A follow-up question to that. So I think Adam did not receive the email, so I'm trying to process all
I
the
apologize.
different
I don't know.
bills.
I thought everybody
Not
got
at
sent
all,
it.
no. I'm just saying that I'm just processing a lot of this information, and it does seem to be a very thoughtful and well-articulated email and proposal. But just before we get ahead of ourselves, I'm just wondering if we can kind of lay out a stepwise plan moving forward. So before we get into how many and all of the technical terms associated with football, of which I know none, I'm wondering if we just first need to address the question of whether we are in favor of contacting our local health authority to get a yay or nay on this, and is that the next step in this
On
sequence?
7v7, are you asking?
Yeah, about anything, like whatever, are we in favor of contacting the local health authority?
So the local
to-
health authority was contacted
Okay.
the day after the CIAC said that the state health department would not endorse it, therefore they could not endorse it, and they were recommending, they were allowing, changing their rules to allow for club sports. So that Monday, Dave Franklin and I called Charles Brown, Central Health District, and
Oh, that's
asked
what
him
you
that.
said earlier, I'm sorry. I'm
Yeah,
still
so the 11 on 11 he would not support it. He was adamant he would not support it. So at that point, Dave had conversations with Darson, the coach, and let him know that it couldn't take place in the health department. We have not had conversations, to my knowledge, about the 7v7, but I know it's discussions going on. I know there's a league meeting today, Dave was at, about having the 7v7. The part that's, the reluctancy behind it is that it doesn't allow for the linemen. It's a much different football game than what we're used to. And so the thought is at this point that the 7v7 would probably get endorsed by, and we could have, league forming to do that. The concern by Dave is that you could have student athletes that are playing the 7v7 and also joining independent leagues to play 11 on 11. And is that safe for the athletes to be that much football with? And is the CIAC going to allow that, which we don't know, right? They might say you either play one or the other, which poses a whole other set. Because now it's no longer a Berlin team; it's now you're on an independent team, So, I think that's and in order for even, let's just say, nothing to do with the board, but someone formed an independent Berlin team, not with the schools, they would have to get equipment, which would involve the schools, and that's where liability should come. They would also have to get the town to give them use of field for practice and or games, unless the games were somewhere else in the independent. There's a host of things. But I think from where we are, to kind of what we do not, I think the issue is if there's 7v7, I think, does the board support 7v7? And what I'm hearing is that the board would support that, without a doubt, the 7v7. I don't know where the board sits with the 11-11 against the health department, and stepping out into those areas, and that's another discussion. But if 7v7 moves forward, my thought is that we have the board's backing, and I would recommend to Dave to communicate with the coaches and the league, and if it gets going, to have us get involved.
So out of the 7 things that are proposed here, the 7 topics that Mr. Melville lists, is there anything here that was not discussed already with Charles Brown in terms of that these might be game changer proposals that might be worth going to him, or have we already conversed about these things?
What was conversed with Charles was 11 on 11. The 7v7 has not gone to Charles.
Right, well, this isn't even about the 7v7 though, right? This is about how do you make 11v11 work. But he does have 7 proposals to make it work, and I don't know whether these types of ideas were already discussed or not.
I don't think it's going to have it. I don't think it's, I can share that with Charles. I don't think it's having any impact on his decision of whether he feels it's safe. But considering the high risk at the state level, so to ask a local health department to go against what the state is saying, I think puts that local person in situations.
So I have 2 questions. The first being, Brian, at one point you said that we would need to get, well, not we, the football, if they did a separate 11v11 on their own, they'd have to get permission to use the fields. Is that something that the Board of Ed could help that conversation with the town manager?
Can I answer that, Brian? Because I work for the town.
Go ahead, Jamie.
So it's my direct boss is actually in charge of the fields, and Jen Ochoa, and she absolutely will go with what the health district says, because that we have frequent conversations regarding that as well. So anytime a conversation comes up townwide, it normally goes through the health district as well. So I'm not saying that they would say no for sure,
Right.
but it would be.
Well, at least you have that realistic perspective because you're working with it daily. Thank you, Jamie. My second question, Brian, this is for you. At what point is this like a Brian decision, superintendent versus Board of Ed? Is this something that the Board of Education would in fact have to approve? Or is this something that you would look to us for? Because I know there's oftentimes we get emails and correspondence to hear the community, but sometimes this falls in your realm, not ours.
I think the board could charge me to make the decision.
Okay.
But I also think that, you're looking at it from a liability standpoint. For me as superintendent to put the district in a liable situation and to go against legal advice and to go against the health department's advice, no matter what my personal beliefs are on it, I don't think is the most ethical thing to do. or is it the most professional, in my opinion? So, I mean, if the board wants to charge me with making the decision superintendent, that's fine, but I think, you know, we need to have some understanding of the health department, and we need to have the legal implications of whatever we do. Whatever those items are, I think we have to have those two filters when we make the decisions.
So to follow up on that, I guess from my personal perspective, connected to what Julia just said, I'm not a health expert. We employ people to be health experts. I do not feel comfortable looking to override what our local health district is recommending. I just think that that would be foolish. That's not to say that 7v7 couldn't work or that there couldn't be another form of football if that's what it comes down to. But I personally can't ask you to go and say we're going to override what the health director is saying. That to me doesn't make any sense at all.
If it's, you know, I'm not saying that we should follow what others, but, you know, I'm obviously on with the Hartford area superintendents on a listserv and so on, and I can tell you that at the point that the letter came out from CIAC, there wasn't one Hartford superintendent that all came out and said they will not go against what the health director recommends. So, I mean, that's...
And even if we do override our health district, there probably aren't going to be too many other teams to play. Just reality.
Any other comments, questions, perspectives to hear?
So I do have
Yep.
another question. So what would our next steps be in terms of this whole conversation we had?
I think one position is, two things can move forward. The 7v7 could move forward with CIAC backing, which I think it would, and with the health department approving it. I think they will approve that. The independent league, we need to have some understanding, or you need to charge me with that. You know, right now, the letter to CIAC president says not to loan equipment because you're in a liable situation, even if parents and student athletes sign off. So if that's something we want to support our student athletes, and by allowing them to use the equipment and the uniforms if needed, you know, you got to have me investigate that further, and I should report back to you, you know, what the liability is in doing so. To me, that's something that could move forward. We could have many student athletes forming their own independent Berlin team, or you could have a few athletes joining other teams from Berlin that may need the equipment or want to use the equipment. So, you know, one thing I'd want to look into that further with our attorneys to see what the liability actually is if the board feels that loaning the equipment is acceptable.
I have one last question. Sorry, I'm full of them.
I thought the last one was your one last
I
question.
know.
Go ahead.
I keep thinking all of them are. Out of the districts that were mentioned in the letter, could we see if any of them also use Shipman as their legal representation?
Southington does.
And see, just
Meriden does also. I know they do.
okay.
Yeah.
Just to see like where they stand legally.
On the liability issue that we're
Yeah,
talking
it's a
about.
major liability, but if Shipman is giving other recommendations, I think it's just something to consider because the student athletes are willing to make a sacrifice by going full distance learning, and you know they really want their season.
And like I said, if it's not a liability issue, we can get around when it's not a liability issue. Even if our student athletes are playing in independent league, I would hope that we could allow them to use the equipment to be able to play, you know, as long as it's not putting us in a jeopardizing situation. So, I mean, I would look, you know, talk to our attorneys to see how we could do that, you know, as long as the board's backing of that. But like I said initially to them when we had the meeting, I want to do whatever I can to allow them to play at the greatest level possible, whether it's 7v7, whether it's independent, you know. So.
I don't hear anybody saying anything other than that. Mary Ellen, Jeff?
I'm just curious about the option to play in the spring. I mean, we all know that you can't depend on anything these days, but is it a slightly realistic option?
Slightly, they've talked about shortening one season and then having the other, running it into the summer, running it through the month of June. That was something thrown on the table. You know, maybe they would run it over the summer, even through July. I don't know. They've kicked a lot of suggestions around, but no one's locked into anything. You know, I think the CIAC is definitely feeling the pressure to make it happen, so I think they're looking for, you know, any way possible.
Anything else? It's definitely an issue that a lot of people in the community are passionate about, so I'm glad we had the conversation. Do you feel like you have some next steps in your mind as far as contacting Charles, at least about the 7v7 or about the liability issues
Absolutely.
from
So-
the lawyers?
Spoke to, with Dave, we'll have a meeting with, Mr. Melville when we have some more answers, and with,
Okay.
Coach Arsimowitz, and have that discussion, and if others want to be a part of it. But we'd like to have some more information before we have the meeting, so we can answer.
Thank you. And thank you to Mr. Melville for writing an articulate, intelligent, thoughtful letter that got us going off on this important conversation tonight.
I agree.
If there's any other board member that didn't get a copy of his letter, let us know. I know that Carrie didn't and Adam didn't, but you have it now. If there's anybody else that needs it, just let us know. We'll get it for you. All right, we're moving into the Board of Ed workshop section. And the board goals is the first thing on there. If you have your tablet open, I would ask to, sorry, I hit the wrong button. To go to where it says Draft Board of Education Goals. And if you scroll down to the bottom of page 1, and I'll read all 3 of these into the record so everybody knows at home what we're talking about. Each of our 3 committees, our Curriculum Committee, our Community Engagement Committee, and our Finance and Operations Committee, put forth long-term goals. Long-term could be a year, it could be 2 years. We could revamp these at any point. But right now, these are the goals that are in writing, and it's up to us now to determine action steps for this next school year. The one we've just started is right now. So let's go through them, and we're not going to create these action steps right here. But you'll notice if you go to the next page that Aaron has been kind enough to put some ideas and suggestions down as to some of the things that we can do to begin to make these things happen. So, for the Curriculum Committee, the Berlin Board of Education will maintain rigorous performance standards in all areas of curriculum that facilitate independent critical thinking and strategic problem solving among students. And if you scroll down into the Curriculum Committee objectives, they're calling objectives here. They are, to me, it's kind of an action plan. How do we make that happen? I would love to see 2 things chosen, and they don't have to be just the ones from the list. If anybody has other ideas, Erin's list that she began was very helpful to get us thinking along these lines. And we have a few ideas down here. And I was thinking if we could come back 2 meetings from now, so the meeting at the end of October, and have every committee put together 2 action steps that they would like. And I'm going to read the other 2 as well. But 2 action steps, that's where my thoughts are going. And then you can use these to start with, or you can, again, come up with some of your own. And then we can discuss and kind of put them in the record over what actions each committee is determined to take. So the community engagement goal. The Berlin Board of Education will engage our community through effective communication, utilizing a multitude of means that reach all stakeholders. Current methods are in-person interactions, multimedia, print, social media, and public meetings. And again, if you scroll down, there's 2 ideas right there, some of which we're doing already. Maybe we do them slightly differently. Maybe we say, you know what, this is already something that's working for our group, for our committee. But the committees will have to determine that. And then the Finance and Operations Committee, the Berlin Board of Education will work to develop and adopt a responsible fiscal annual budget, develop and maintain a 10-year capital plan encompassing both facility maintenance and technology equipment to ensure that the ever-changing educational needs of the students are met and provide feedback and oversight to fiscal decisions. So that's kind of our charge in my mind. There's a lot in that Finance and Operations one. Obviously, they're very important. Does anybody have either better ideas or questions regarding, or comments regarding what I'm kind of laying out here as far as our charge? No? So let's say that by the meeting, it's the end of October, 26th I want to say, but I'm not sure of the exact date on the meeting. I don't have it in front of me at the moment. Let's say, I can look it up quickly enough though, right? 26th, that was right. So by the October 26th meeting, each committee chair would report back the 2 things that they want to accomplish, and then we'll put it right into the meeting and we'll kind of just share it as a group of what 2 things, what 2 action plans they're willing to put into play to address the long-term goals for the year. We okay with that?
Could we talk for a moment about the 3 goal areas, are we set that those are the goals that they were written last year? That's so we have the curriculum goal, the community engagement, the broader, not goals for the year, but, you know, it says the Berlin Board of Education will maintain rigorous performance standards. Are we okay with those at this point? Because they were written last year, we kind of never really formally said that, yes, this is, we're all on board, this is what each committee's doing when we reform the committees?
The 3 committee chairs came back with these after having conversations and deliberating with the committee. I'm fine with the 3. If anybody has one, if you're on one of those committees and you don't agree that this is the way it should be worded, or you want the opportunity to reword it, speak now or hold your peace. We okay? Go ahead.
So and this may be just nitpicky, I understand the intention, but in terms of the Board of Education maintaining rigorous performance standards, are those performance goals, sort of the set points for achievement, or are they curricular, because it says in all areas of curriculum. So who's accountable for performance, I guess, is my
I think you
question
are.
on that. Yeah,
Since you're the
great.
chair of the
Thank you.
curriculum
Awesome.
committee.
That's fantastic.
Do you want
So what
to-
I mean, performance standards as it relates to student performance, or as it relates to those responsible for delivering the curricula.
Do you think you might want to wordsmith this one a little
I just
bit?
think we need to explore what that means a little bit. And again, maybe I'm just being nitpicky and it makes perfect sense to everyone else, but.
Why don't we communicate it as a committee then, and we'll see if we want to tweak the wording a little bit to make it more clear. And because I know we have a committee meeting coming up in 2 weeks, and then in my mind, it still gives us 2 additional weeks to come up with the goals, the action steps that get us there. Is
Sounds
that
great.
reasonable?
And
How
Carrie,
about
as
yours?
far as I can remember, we actually were playing with those words in our retreat when we were developing that.
Settle it.
Yeah.
How about the community engagement piece, Julia, since you're the chair of that? Are you satisfied with the way it's worded?
Yes, I am, and I just think we need to get a meeting on the books in the next few weeks and continue. And I think as a committee, we've been doing that. We've taken steps to improve this year with the social media. So I think it's just us coming together as a committee and talking through some of the points.
All right, thank you. Tim, the new chair of the Finance and Operations Committee. I know that you had some input, I believe, from the 3 of you when Matt was still the chair. The 3 of you and Adam and Matt drew this up. Are you satisfied with the way it's worded, or would you like the opportunity to tweak it a bit?
Yeah, this was mostly Adam and my doing anyway, so.
Matt, who?
If any of the 3 of you decide that you're good with it as is, or you want to tweak it a bit, that's fine. To me, this does not need to be voted on as the board as a whole. This is each committee's work going forward. Although the committees will change after the election, by the end of November, the committees may change subtly or in whole, but we'll have to address, at least the goals will be set by the time the new committees are put in motion. All right.
We go to top for a minute.
Sure, what are we going to the top on?
So when we wrote the core values, and I'm going to ask Erin. Erin, do you mind? Erin really was instrumental in pulling it together and had a lot of input here. So I'm going to ask Erin if she wouldn't mind talking about. We'd like to talk about. Go ahead, Erin. I'm going to turn it over to you.
You have a microphone?
I'm going to tee it up.
No, you don't.
Here.
I don't know, so can we write in?
This thing,
So from my perspective, there are 2 outstanding issues from last year when we were looking at putting this together. One is that when the board adopted the new policy reflecting the updated mission, core values, and practices supporting the core values, at a later meeting, one of the discussions that came up had to do with the core values that are currently posted on the district website and printed in the board handbook. And so essentially the issue is that we have core values in different places that are labeled core values. And Carrie, I believe that you were one of the people that pointed that out and said that essentially the core values that are listed on the website are kind of like operating principles or guiding principles. So the easiest way to fix the problem, so to speak, would be to simply rename this section of the handbook either operating or guiding principles, and then update the handbook and the website to reflect that minor change.
We did have that conversation before. I think that's a great idea. It makes complete sense. I honestly, to rename it, I know we talked about it. I think Tim brought it up as well, and Carrie brought it up. I think we just never formally did it.
Right.
But it makes complete sense.
So because it was never formally done or agreed on by the whole board, we were hesitant to go through the process of changing the handbook and changing the website without your agreement on that piece. So
Does anybody feel strongly against doing what we just spoke of? No? Then I think that's fine. What was the other piece?
do you have a preference to whether it's
Oh, wait,
guiding or
Tim had-
operating
Just-
principles?
Just
I'm sorry.
procedurally, since we're inside of a policy, do we need to have a first reading and
This
second
is-
reading and
this-
adoption?
This
or-
is not a policy. The policy piece is just the section at the top that ends under, with the table that says core values. So
Okay.
I just pulled that out of the policy. The core values are not in board policy. So the language that says the purpose of the operating principles is just something that I pulled from another website defining what an operating principle was, but I think guiding principle works equally well. It's really a matter of the board's preference in terms of the wording for that.
Do we have a preference between, to me, guiding probably makes more sense, but does anybody have a preference as to what we call it?
I agree with guiding.
Guiding?
It's educational.
Okay, we'll go with guiding principles then.
And the second piece, although you had a little bit of discussion about the board goals, I would say there's, when these are published in the handbook and published on the website, they're published as overall goals of the board. So I think that while they have been sometimes associated committee by committee by committee, they really reflect goals of the entire board that the entire board is working for. So another potential proposal would be to adopt them as board goals, but to potentially take off the labels of the three committees. That the work of the committees is already well established in the policy that you passed last year with the revision of the policy. But what it would mean in the handbook and in other places where we publish it is that the goals stand as three goals of the board rather than a goal for the committee.
And the committee has yearly goals, which are outlined by the action steps, which are the next part down that you spoke of, Rich, getting it ready for next. There's 2 or 3 for each one.
Yeah, so in educational ease, we would say there's like long-term goals and short-term objectives. And what you're really discussing when you're talking about the work for this year is like what your shorter term's objectives, so you don't have to go back and change the goals
Right.
year after year after year. The objectives reflect the short-term priorities.
Right. I think that makes perfect sense because even though these 3 goals are associated with the work of committees, they're really the collective work of the board in its entirety. So I think it makes perfect sense to say that these are the goals of, that's my opinion, but I think that that makes perfect sense to make them the shared goals of the entire board, whereas it may be the charge of the respective committees to take on associated tasks, but of each of them, but that otherwise that makes perfect sense
Which
to
I think
me.
you've delineated very clearly in the policy that you adopted last year with the revised committees. Like that work of the purpose of the committees and the specific functions of each of the committee is very well spelled out.
So why don't we finalize this when we meet back on the 26th, because we're going to be choosing the 2. Certainly the top part about, what do we call it? The guiding principles is set in terms of how we're going to phrase or how we're going to structure these 3 goals, because we're going to tweak one of them at least right now, coming back. So when we come back on the 26th, we can just finalize everything all at the same time, including the action steps, plus also if we want to take off the committee names as well.
Sure.
That's my suggestion. And that gives a little bit of time in case either the committees wants, the other committees wants to play with the wording slightly, and then we can bring it to the board as a whole. Does that work for you as well?
Well, it's not really about working for me, but
Well, no,
yes.
but it is partially. I get it. No, I just want to make sure that
It does
it
wrap
works
up
for
a couple
everyone.
of things that were sort of hanging out there.
Okay.
And it was preventing us from moving forward with finalizing the revisions of the handbook and the revisions to the website.
Okay. Any questions on the board goals and where we're going? So we're coming back in a month, and we're going to finalize everything, including, and the irony, of course, is we're creating these action steps and finalizing the goals the meeting before the board's about to change. And possibly the committees will change, but at least that we're at the starting line. We've already started to move. So the new people involved in different committees will at least have something to work off of. So they're not jumping in, because we're gonna have several new members. And they're gonna jump into the water and not really know what direction to swim. That was a really good analogy. I just made
It
that up, by
was.
the way.
Nice
Thank
job.
you. Thank you. Okay, I think now we're going to the Equity and Social Justice Plan, and I think Aaron is gonna help lead us through that. Or Aaron and Brian, whoever.
Aaron's sharing with you the NSBA statement. And
Aaron, you should grab the mic again.
Thank you. So in your folder, in the folder for this meeting, there's a subfolder labeled Equity and Social Justice Resources. So this summer, after Brian indicated that you're interested in pursuing further work on equity and social justice as a board goal, as part of his superintendent goals and evaluation, we started to look at what sorts of resources we could put together to help to guide that work. This folder represents a sampling of some of the work that other school districts in this area are doing related to equity and social justice. And I think it's important when you're moving forward with this work to ground our work in seeing what other districts are doing and sort of some of the work that's out there already, instead of starting from scratch as if no one is addressing any of this work. Similarly, CABE has put together resources that are in the folder as well. So one of the documents is the CABE Equity Toolkit. And the second document that I found that I thought was very helpful is the document that I just passed out and is also in the folder, that is from the National School Board Association. And certainly the National School Board put this together in the spring as a result of the national discussion about equity and social justice in our schools. So what this document is essentially is a charge for a Board of Education to adopt, saying, this is what we would like. We're going to establish this committee. In this sample, it's called a Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Advisory Committee. It doesn't have to have that name. This is a draft document that we can edit in any way that we wish. And essentially charges the committee with certain areas to focus on. And to me, the value of that is that as a Board of Education, you're publicly communicating the values in terms of the importance of this work by saying we're behind this work and we're supporting it in these ways. And at the same time, you're also limiting the scope of the work and saying these are the things that are most important to us as a board that we want the committee to work on. Because you can imagine any kind of committee that you put together like this could have a scale of work that is huge. So in some ways it serves to limit it and say, these are the specific things that are relevant to our work as a school board and a school district that we want to prioritize. So my suggestion would be, as we move forward, that if the board is interested in adopting something like this, that we set a time in a workshop sort of format where we can go through this document and use this as a base to charge the superintendent with formulating the advisory committee, and decide which of those things are priorities for you, which parts you like, which parts you want to discard, if there are things that you want to add to that. So I'm going to pause for a second and see if you have what questions you have about this as a resource for you.
I have a question. Thank you for putting all this together in the folder. As I was looking through it today, there's a lot there, and I think it's also helpful to see the other towns and what they've put together already. So thank you. Would this, would it make sense before bringing it to workshop to have a committee do that work first and then bring it to the board, or do you think it should be done with the full board?
That is clearly your decision if you wanted to create a subcommittee. And in my experience, it often makes sense to to start things in smaller groups than to wordsmith as a whole committee. But because this doesn't fall under one of the purview of one of your existing committees, we would either have to have an ad hoc committee or volunteers come together to do that. And I would be happy to work with those people to create a draft.
Some towns, as you mentioned, have created committees around social justice, equity committees. Most boards have already made steps, inroads towards this. Whether they have a committee set up, whether they've adopted a statement, a purpose, goals, or whether they have some kind of active community engagement committee, like the Southington one is in here. I'm really glad that you brought a lot of other ones to it. And I found the CAPE toolkit very interesting to go through as well, with some excellent points and some, I don't know if I'd say eye-opening, but it gives perspective and it gives us some direction.
Right.
Like the concept of equity, for example, is not something we've talked about a lot, or the concept of cultural competence. Things that maybe some people know, but the board as a whole really hasn't had that conversation before. I'm open to either direction. I know it's more difficult to do it as a board, but because it's so important, if we have some things to, I don't know, I'm torn on this. It would give direction if we had a subcommittee, but it would delay the process.
But not
Well-
to interject,
No, go ahead.
I just think that with all the emails we got and the large community response we got, something of this nature would be worth having a subcommittee or ad hoc committee take the time it deserves, because in our workshops, you know, I don't think we've typically sat through like a 6-hour workshop. This is going to require time and effort and attention to detail. And the only time that we've really spent that much time is when we have our annual retreats, right? And that's when we do our Friday night and our full day Saturday. So to give this the appropriate time and effort and, you know, respond to the community needs, I think a
So-
subcommittee makes
So Julie,
sense.
I'm going to say that, with all due respect, you have to make a decision as a board about how you want to move forward on this. The document that I'm sharing with you is the board charging for a committee to be formed. It's not actually like establishing the plan of the committee and coming up with the action steps and all of those kinds of things. The work that is in the folder represents committees that have been so charged, going off and creating the work. And part of that, to be frank, is deciding who you want to be on the committee. Are you seeing this as board members and school district personnel and students and community members? Are you seeing it as an internal district-only committee? Like, there's some decisions there. And I certainly think a subgroup of the board could come together before the October meeting and make some draft recommendations, even to go
To
through
draft the
this.
charge, to essentially
draft
to
the
draft the
charge.
charge.
Absolutely.
No, I
But
think
it's
that
not,
makes sense,
you're
Aaron.
right that even after that is done, there may be work that you decide to do as a board by saying, we need to grow more in this area ourselves as a board, and we want to engage a consultant to work with the board at a board retreat, or we want to participate in this kind of learning together. You know, there are other things that you might choose to do as a board that are separate from like a larger committee.
And even on the larger committee, I, for one, would like at least one board member on there. Hopefully more,
Yeah.
whoever's interested, we can get people. If we're going to support something this important, we have to be a voice in the room and ears in the room while it's all being discussed.
Our initial thought, Julia, was to have this charge from the entire board, so the whole board is on board, and then, as was said, to break up whether it's, you know, one ad hoc committee or even multiple ad hoc committees, so you could have a community-based committee, you could have various ones, but really wanted to make sure the whole board, so it's coming from the entire board. So whether we do a small group to further wordsmith and bring it to the whole board, but I think it's important the whole board is, not to sound coy, the whole board is on board initially before we start going off, so that, you know, it's not only a fraction of the board.
So I guess in my mind where we are, I would like to see, now that you've worded it that way, I think you're right. I would like to
Thank
see,
you for clarifying that, because I think it was unclear previously, so I appreciate that.
I would like to see a small group if you were kind enough to work with that small group to go over just the charge itself, bring it to the board as a whole. And then so we have a starting point for a conversation, and then decide if we all are in agreement with the charge of the board at that point.
I agree with
yeah.
you,
I think I'm
Rich.
hearing that the other way.
Tell me what.
I think the initial step is for the board to say, we think it's important to have a committee focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we are charging that a committee be formed for that. And it is going to include a couple of board members, members of the public, teachers, administrators, clergy, you name it.
Right, but important to the board versus here's the direction that we want the committee to, these are the goals of the committee to move forward before they're charged. I think it's two slightly different things.
I think the committee should be charged with coming up with the goals. From the broad brush of focusing on diversity, equity, inclusion,
So I'm just going to acknowledge this is complicated and there are lots of different ways to go about this. I'm just going to point you that in the folder there are other documents, including a policy that, I'm sorry, I just need to pull it up for a second. The Brookfield Board of Education adopted a resolution that went through their committee in a similar way to the way a policy would go through. So they set that out as sort of like, this is where we are and what we believe as a board. And their diversity and equity work has sort of flowed off of that. So, you know, the reason that I showed you a number of samples is because districts have handled this in a variety of ways. Some committees are much more community and district partnerships. Some are very much the district is doing the work and leading the work. Julie, I don't know in your district how that.
Yeah, I'm not too sure.
I mean, I think, Rich, I would feel comfortable with even just using almost the entire boilerplate of the NSBA document to charge that we want to create this committee, because it's as generalized as it can get, because obviously the NSBA is looking to shoot at that high level of here's a general direction that we want to go with this, and then allow the task force that gets put together, or the committee, to determine what the diverse voice representation means.
Go ahead.
The importance of having the whole board stand behind that, as this is the board's position statement almost, this is what we believe, is important moving forward to the public. So as the committee's formed, the committee knows where the board, which represents, you know, everyone, where the entire board is, rather than have a subcommittee representing it. It's important that the board, and then the subcommittee can take that and move with, you know, with whatever direction is laid out here from the board, and move beyond it. So, I mean, because I think this also has to be a public document once it's created. It should not be something that's just the board. It should be, regardless of what is in front of the board, what situations that we're dealing with, this should be something that stands behind where our stance is going to be. So
I think, and I'm actually on the Southington one, the Social Justice Committee, as recalled. I think, Tim, we have to have some direction given to the group that's going to be formed in terms of what their goals are, and they come up with the action steps to get us to those places. But and I can only reflect to what Southington's is like. There's 50 or 70 people on this. Community, kids, teachers, parents, community members. To have 50 or 70 people try to come up with something like this, even if you break them into subcommittees, is a very long process.
Oh, yeah, I can imagine.
So I get what you mean completely. And I still am thinking I would like a handful of us to work on this before the next meeting. Bring it to the board as a whole, Brian. I think that's where the board support comes from. But say, what exactly do we want this group to try to accomplish? And then leave it to them to put together the steps to try to accomplish that.
And I think whatever the subcommittee brings back, you would certainly be open to feedback from other members of the board when you have that
Absolutely.
discussion.
Absolutely.
So it's
That's where
not like
next
it would
meeting
just be decided
Right.
by the small committee.
Correct.
You're saying they would make some recommendations in the draft.
This is what we're recommending. Now let's debate this as a whole, and if we need to make some changes, we can. Everybody will have a voice in it, even if they can't be part of the one that creates the charge, if you will. What are any other thoughts on that? If I'm going down the wrong road from anybody else, please tell me.
I took your mic.
So,
I'm okay with that so long as it doesn't delay
right.
this process. Like you said, this is something that we could have and probably should have done months ago. You know, but I guess the notion of trying to sharpen the direction of where this committee or task force will go is probably not a bad idea.
So if we say our goal for 2 weeks from now is to come to a consensus on what the charge of the committee is going to be, that creates, and then, so we work from this document or however we're going to do this. So 2 weeks from now, and I agree, I don't want this to be delayed anymore. We are behind other districts on this, and I think it's important that we get moving on this. And so if we can say 2 weeks from now, we're going to have a clear charge for the committee, and then we can have a conversation about what the committee is going to be built like, and et cetera. Are you okay with that?
Absolutely.
So is that something maybe we will work on in advance of our meeting 2 weeks from now?
I
or
think we have to.
Okay.
I think we have to. So at least a handful of us working behind the scenes
Okay.
to put something together to work off of in the next meeting. So we're not just coming and trying to do it here.
Yes. Okay.
Will we make it official and call it an ad hoc, or
I think
do it
that's-
under?
I think we'd have to probably,
We'd have
right?
to, or do it under one of the committees.
But that would, well, I would do it under ad hoc and open it up.
Yeah, like Aaron said, no existing committee
Right.
fits the
It
mold.
doesn't fit. And
So-
other places do have a committee.
Not that it's inappropriate necessarily to throw it in a
Right.
committee where it doesn't belong, but
So I'm not asking
Better to
anybody
call
to
it ad
commit
hoc.
their time immediately right in front and, you know, with no thought to this. If you want to get back to me by, I don't know, 8 o'clock. And if you want to get back to me by tomorrow or the next day and let me know, because we want to get moving right away. And then, Aaron, are you willing to work with this subgroup? Okay, so we'll coordinate that effort with Aaron and we'll start moving on this. That's excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you. No, thank you so much for putting all this together. It's a lot of information, but well worth the effort. All right. I think we've now gotten to our executive session anticipation. So I think we need a motion to go to executive session, inviting the superintendent and do we need assistant superintendent or just superintendent? Okay, she's done enough work for today.
I move to enter executive session, inviting the superintendent
To discuss the Board of Education
to
self-evaluation.
discuss the Board of Education
the personal.
self-evaluation.
Second.